Hey everyone, we have arrived at topic 4 of our class, and that is generative AI and student learning and teacher productivity. And I hope that you find this useful, both as something to help you more productive as a teacher, as well as learn about a bunch of related issues that we need to keep in mind when using generative AI as professionals, as well as potentially as a learning tool. Now, this was the alternate name that I thought of this week for the workshop. I think I'm going to change this for next time, but Generative AI in Education, Automate the Mundane, Not the Mind. And I think this really encapsulates what my hope is for our class this week. Before we get going, just another check-in poll here that you can take part in. And here are our learning objectives for today as well. So first of all, just going to tell a little story. A few years ago, I was asked by a family member to help their teenager with their Macbeth writing assignment for English 12. And let's call this person Pat. I quickly found that Pat just hated Shakespeare. But the Macbeth assignment was big enough that they had to complete it with a passing grade in order to graduate from English 12. The assignment unfortunately didn't come with learning objectives, but the instructions seemed to indicate that the purpose of the assignment was to, 1, improve their comprehension, reading comprehension, 2, improve writing skills, and maybe develop an appreciation for Shakespeare. So I gave Pat substantial one-on-one support to help them complete their writing assignment. And they were visibly relieved when they finally had their paper submitted. Pat received a C+ for the paper, although I have to admit, after all the support that I gave them, I thought they should have received between a B or an A- for the paper, but we can cover teacher bias on another day. That said, could generative AI have helped Pat's teacher more easily customize the assignment and rubric for a different topic that was hopefully something or a topic that Pat was more interested in? Well, let's think about that today. Back when Pat did this was a number of years ago, generative AI was not an option to rework assignments like that. If it was, I think it potentially could have helped. But again, we'll dig into that later. So just one recommendation to maybe help you be a little bit more productive or efficient in doing your critical reflections is during our class lecture time, or even the hands-on activities, make some notes about things in the lecture or the activities that seem important to you, things that you're personally interested in, and maybe some things that are counterintuitive to you. And then at the end, when we have time set aside for actually working on your critical reflection, you have a starting point and hopefully can finish your critical reflection a little more quickly. So back in December of 2022, I'd heard about in the news about ChatGPT, and I was going to be teaching this class, EDCI 336, in January. So I thought, well, I better check this out just to see, what all the fuss is about. So I just finished writing a paper on informal credentialing and academic makerspaces. So I put in a prompt that would hopefully get back information on the topic that I was completely up to date on. And again, I just finished a research paper on it. And I was blown away. The response from ChatGPT was arguably as good as the abstract that I wrote for my article myself. And I jaw dropped and I thought, wow, we're going to have problems giving writing assignments in education, K-12, university, everywhere. What I didn't realize is that it is not always that good, of course, as I'm sure most of you know. This is about 2 years ago now. There was a lawyer in Vancouver who was representing their client in a divorce case, and they submitted their documents to the court about the case that went to the lawyers on the other side of the case. The lawyers were looking at the documents and saw some novel arguments that the other lawyer had made, and they followed up on the citations just to see, if they'd interpreted the court rulings and other documents that they'd cited. And out of I think it was 6 citations, all of them were real documents. they could only find one of them, one of the quotes. The other 5 they couldn't find in the documents. So they let the judge know that they couldn't find these quotes, and the judge talked to the originating lawyer and said, please, please help us find where they are. The other lawyers can't find these quotes that you put in your documents. And at that point, the lawyer said, oh, oops, actually, I used ChatGPT to help me prepare these documents. So the judge, after some deliberation, ordered the lawyer to pay for the time that the lawyers on the other side of the case had wasted trying to find these fabricated quotes. I think it was $8,000 or $9,000. The judge also ordered the lawyer to send letters of apologies to the 5 judges that he'd fabricated quotes from with the help of ChatGPT, and said that he wouldn't fine him or sanction him further because the judge felt he'd suffered enough reputational damage that it would be adding insult to injury. So again, this lawyer did substantial reputational damage to himself because he didn't, actually it was a wrong tool to use, but besides that, he didn't supervise the tool properly, like he would have done a junior lawyer or a research assistant. Generative AI will sometimes make stuff up. It will sound plausible and good, but it will make things up. So if we can't supervise it properly, or if we don't have the background knowledge to do that, we are really playing with fire and could potentially do serious reputational damage to ourselves. So this will be a review for a lot of you, I suspect, but just so we're all on the same page, just a quick overview of artificial intelligence. And to start with, generative AIs are not intelligence. As the quote there by Richard Stallman says, it has no intelligence. It can't avoid mistakes because it doesn't know what the words mean. Unfortunately, general purpose generative AI tools like ChatGPT are a lot like eager and overconfident interns who will make up plausible sounding responses, including fake quotes from experts in the field and fake citations in order to fulfill your requests. Doesn't always do this, but it does it often enough that we need to be extremely careful, or we will do reputational damage to ourselves, like that lawyer did, for example. So this diagram's helped us situate where generative AI lies in the larger artificial intelligence ecosystem. We've got artificial intelligence here, machine learning that we're all familiar with from recommendations from Amazon. If you use Amazon or any shopping site nowadays, actually, Netflix uses it to suggest movies. Combine that with natural language processing so that computers can actually create text that sounds like humans. And at that intersection of machine learning and natural language processing, we get large language models that we have today, who are really meant to sound like humans in text form, more and more in audio form as well, but that's a different story. And some of the big large language models are ChatGPT, Google Gemini, Claude, which is an excellent tool, Copilot, which currently anyways is not one that I'd recommend except potentially for some privacy purposes here at UVic that I'll talk about. But we've been using generative AI for quite a while now, starting with writing on your phone, which sometimes helpfully completes words for you as you start to type. But generative AI tools really are a double-edged sword. We've talked about this already, but Socrates thought that allowing students to use books, which was the newfangled ed tech of his day, was a bad idea because it would diminish their memories. He was probably right about that, but he didn't realize how large a positive impact books would have on educating a broader audience, transmitting information more reliably, for example. The powered looms back in the Industrial Revolution destroyed the livelihoods of many skilled traditional loom workers. And if we can just put the issue of child labor aside, but was the rest of society better off with less expensive clothing that the powered looms enabled? So was anything else lost or gained during the move to powered looms? Again, we won't talk about this directly, but most innovations have positive and negative aspects for them, and we're going to talk more about that today with generative AI in particular, of course. This is an interesting story from, I think, the late 70s, early 80s. You can see the headline there: math teachers protest the use against calculator use. And I was wondering about that because we use calculators quite a bit now, of course. And I thought, well, that's kind of, I think calculators do have a place, until I saw this this little line at the bottom here, which I'll make larger. It was elementary schools teachers that were picketing. And actually, this makes a lot more sense to me anyways, is that when kids or people are learning foundational skills, at a certain point, it makes perfect sense to have them do things by hand so that they can learn the fundamental principles before they move on to using a calculator, because they do need those fundamental principles to understand what's going on so that they can correctly interpret it, what they're doing, and know better how to use the calculator in this case, for example. This is a big one from my perspective anyways with generative AI tools, critical thinking and problem solving, and a question for us, is over-reliance is one of them. Should we avoid using excessive reliance on generative AI, which arguably could stunt the development of critical thinking and problem solving skills in learners? I think there's growing evidence that that probably is the case. Another aspect of it is human judgment. We need to make sure that learners understand the importance of human judgment and interpretation when evaluating generative AI outputs when we're doing that. But the critical thinking and problem solving is a real issue that we as educators need to grapple with. How we grapple with that, what our answers are, and what the techniques we use to help our learners gain those skills, we'll be talking about today. And in general, I look at generative AI as a double-edged sword, like I mentioned before. Used by a subject expert, it can make them significantly more productive because they can fact-check the output of the generative AI tool in real time. Whereas if you're a novice in a subject area, and again, this is about a subject area, not in general. If there's a novice in a subject area, and I'm a novice in many subject areas, if I use it in an area outside of my expertise, I'm going to have to double check and verify all the facts, or I could get myself into serious trouble because the generative AI tools make very plausible sounding text that sounds reasonable. And if you don't have the background to evaluate it, you could publish something under your name that's inaccurate, that could do significant reputational damage to yourself. This is, again, was one of the titles for the workshop, or for today's topic that I think I'm going to adopt going forward. I think automating the mundane and not the mind is one of the ways we should look or evaluate what we should be using generative AI for and what we should not be doing generative AI for. So, just individually now, I'd just like you to think about two ways that you've used generative AI or have seen generative AI used in education, both positively or negatively from your perspective, and maybe one way that you're planning or wish that you could use generative AI. So now we're going to explore some use cases for teacher productivity in K-12, generative AI, that is. One hugely helpful one is creating lesson plans and activities in areas where you have subject expertise at least. The very first time that we covered generative AI in EDCI 336 was January 2023, when ChatGPT was had just sort of raised to public consciousness. So during part of the hands-on activities, I just encouraged the students to explore and see if they could and play with the tool. One of the people in the class who was taking a physical education course and had just been covering the provincial standards for PE in their grade level, put into ChatGPT something to this effect, and I've recreated it here, so this isn't exactly it, but said, I'm a grade 3 teacher, create an outline for 8 weeks of twice a week classes on the British Columbia Physical Education Literacy Standards for grade 3 learners, and then he put in the actual, standard 12.4.3 or whatever it was. And so it created a week-by-week lesson plan, and then he asked for a detailed lesson plan for one of the specific days. And it actually did that, and he reviewed it, and again, he just covered that educational standard in the PE class, so he fact-checked it in real time and said, yeah, this is very good. And then for the daily lesson plan, he said, actually, it's raining today, please suggest indoor activities only. And so it did that, which is amazing. There's lots of other tools that are in the hands-on activities that are education-specific that you could check out. And in terms of privacy, just as long as you're not putting any personally identifiable information about any people in your class into these tools, you should be just fine. But if you have any doubt at all, during your time here at UVic, you can check in with me and I can give you my advice. Once you're in your own school, please check with the school district technology coordinator to run it by them. But again, if you're just asking for a lesson plan, you're not including in the prompt any information, personally identifiable information about your class, you should be fine. Creating educational content. I'm a little more wary of this, but this is something that some teachers do. Again, customized so that's focused on what they want to cover in class. For example, did Canadians set fire to the White House in the War of 1812? And the answer there is no, it was British troops, British regular troops, not. And it has a citation there as well. Again, this might be an interesting thing if you're teaching critical thinking around AI, to put some controversial topics in so that you can evaluate and fact check with your class to demonstrate how generative AI tools need to be fact checked. Another one, again, in terms of creating educational content, would be to create a Jeopardy game. And this is one of the activities, optional activity in hands-on. You can give it not just the information in a prompt, but you could actually give a tool like Notebook LM, all of the documents, online digital documents for thing that you're teaching in class, and then have it base the Jeopardy questions only on information that's in those documents, as one example. So very cool. It's one tool that I use all the time is Notebook LM. Speaking of Notebook LM, you can also create infographics like I did for this class. This is, I think I put in just all the documents from our class related to FIPA and student privacy. And then my prompt was down here, make the colors fun and use simple graphical representations. So that's the only prompt I gave it, but I pointed it at those documents. And the default when it's creating an infographic is to create a summary, and then I just told it to make the colors fun and use simple graphical representations. And I went through here, I've gone through the most common issue with infographics is it will make typos, spelling mistakes. And I didn't notice any in this one in my quick scan. If you notice any, please let me know, but that's another option. I mentioned the Jeopardy questions. So I think I just put a link to the blog post that I just given feedback on from last week into Notebook LM. So it's a publicly available information. And then I said, create 4 Jeopardy game show categories with 5 increasingly difficult questions for each category, framed in the traditional Jeopardy way. So category 1, most likely to succeed. Oops, sorry. And you can see it did here. Those numbers, actually, you can click on them in Notebook LM and it will take you to the part of the blog post where it got that information from. So you can fact check if you like to. There are 4 categories. There's 3 here. You can see 2 here, but it did the 4. And they are roughly in the increasingly difficult order of questions. Another one is vibe coding. I don't know how you've heard that, or sometimes, so it's at its most basic level, you just give Vibe Code tool a prompt and it will create a program. This is not really an educational game. It's more of a prank on a buddy of mine, Flappy Paper Towels. It's a Flappy Bird game. And my prompts to create it, and this took about 5 minutes to create the basic version of it and another 10 minutes to make it more playable. So this first one created the game, and this took 5 minutes for it to create. I'd like to create a Flappy Bird style game with the obstacles at the top and bottom, blah, blah, blah. You can see there. It created a game, but it would end as soon as you made one mistake, and it was super difficult. So eventually, it took me a couple of prompts to get it to this. I told it, give the player the option of different levels of difficulty, easy, normal, hard, and that made the game more playable. And then I realized that, yeah, one and done. So I said, let the player start over 5 times. If they hit a paper towel, give the person 10 points for every towel they... And you can see here, I'll just open up the game so you can see it in action. I'll hit normal, hit game, and then I just click my mouse and can go through. Oh, I died. It's not a perfect game, but you get the idea. It's not too bad. So differentiating educational content or assignments, I think, is a huge area that we as educators can help our students, especially some that are struggling with a particular topic or don't have an interest or outright dislike the topic. So I'll go back to the Macbeth assignment. If I was teaching the class, that English class, and I knew there were some people that just had a visceral or negative reaction to Macbeth, I'd maybe review the learning objectives that I created for the workshop, talk to the people that are struggling, find out what some of their interests are, and then have generative AI help me create an equivalent activity that will meet the learning objectives, or most of the learning objectives, on a different topic rather than Macbeth. Rather than forcing people through through an assignment that they just absolutely hate. So, speaking of assignments, generative AI and assignments, one thing that some teachers do, especially in inquiry-based projects, is have students pose an essential inquiry question and ask them to research and evaluate the response to see how accurate it was. So this is more of a generative AI critical evaluation exercise. Might use the essential question or not, but the real learning objective is to critically evaluate, see if it has any inaccuracies or things that might lead them astray, whether they be 100% inaccurate or maybe just a point of contention on the internet about a particular topic that it's only giving one side of, for example. It's just another example here. So and again, I know there are some of you who you dislike generative AI, do not want to use it. I completely understand that. But we do need to help learners develop AI literacies, along with general information literacy skills. And us as educators need to be familiar with generative AI tools so we can help them do that. And at the very least, test our assignments to see how gameable they are by generative AI tools. So if we have especially take-home assignments, if we don't want students to use generative AI, we need to do some testing ourselves for take-home assignments in particular to make sure that they aren't easily gameable. We'll talk about types of assignments that are more or less easily gameable. Some people will think, hey, we can just use AI checkers to see if our students have been using generative AI, that they're notoriously unreliable and very easily gameable. So for example, a number of people have created AI humanizers, including Grammarly, for example. So this is some text that was generated. I asked for the pros and cons of ed tech in K-12. This is Gemini, and then I put it into this Grammarly tool, and this is the humanized version of it. So if you're thinking, oh, I'll just use one of the AI checkers, one, they're notoriously inaccurate, especially for English language learners. They'll do false positive more frequently on English language learners than someone who's grown up speaking English. And even in general terms, they're easily subverted by even just editing the text yourself, or as a student, they just edit the generative AI text, and that usually will get around these checkers as well. So some assignments that are easily gamed by generative AI tools. The standard 5-paragraph essay, especially if done as a take-home assignment, is really quite easy for standard or historical topics anyways. Reading summaries are, if you're asking people to summarize things that are publicly available, or even not publicly available, they can be imported into most generative AI tools. Math worksheets, quite easily gameable. Multiple choice quizzes, standard lab reports, biography profiles on prominent people, and then for coding, basic code scripts, quite easily gameable. So assignments that are a little more difficult to game would be personal reflections, which is obviously a lot of what we are doing in this class, for example. Case studies. Again, the student might have to upload specific text or information or data, but it is doable. Presentations with slides. Student will still need to deliver the presentation, but if part of the process or the learning objective is for them to create the slides, AI tools can do an okay job. I've used one for one of my presentations before Christmas. It did an okay job, but not great. I wouldn't do it again, at least not yet. Comparing two specific texts, it'll actually do quite a good job, but you've got to give the tool both types of text. Mock interviews, the AI could write the script for you, but students got to perform it, and then discussion board posts. So we don't do it in this class, but the student would have to give the AI tool the other person comments before it can generate a response, of course. The hardest to game, and again, these are for take-home time assignments. Things that require, again, at the top here, localized context, physical experience. So in-class essays, that's one. It's by hand in a controlled environment is sort of the quintessential AI-proof format. Oral examinations, Q&A by the teacher recalls real-time knowledge and recall, as well as critical thinking. Collaborative group projects in class, multimodal projects, so videos, podcasts, makerspace type projects, physical builds. Generative AI tools might assist in the ideation and planning, but the person's going to actually have to physically build it. Community-based problem solving and scaffolded assignments is something that's commonly done as well, where the grade is assessed based on an evolution of drafts, although some of those steps could be done with AI or assisted with AI. So again, these slides are available to you. I'll make sure the link to this in Brightspace for this, and this video is available to you as well on the Topic 4 page. So some ethical considerations there are, and I'm sure some of you are screaming inside, but what about, like, for example, privacy? It's a huge concern and something that we talked about already in general, but it's a huge concern with generative AI as well. Sensitive student information should never, or personally identifiable student information should never be put into generative AI tools unless the tool has been specifically approved for that purpose by your school district. And just for your own personal use nowadays, you should probably check and see if the generative AI tool that you're using by default will use your prompts that you put in as training data for the tool. It's less common now. A lot of the tools by default don't do that, but in the past, the default was for the inputted data, including uploaded documents, to be analyzed by the generative AI tool would become training data. So if I'm a data analyst for a company and I upload a bunch of proprietary data that I'm having the generative AI tool help me with, one of my competitors could do a prompt on something else and have my training data inform the response. And if they're asking for citations, it might even cite it as well. So again, something definitely to keep in mind with, and never upload personally identifiable student information. Another thing is bias. This isn't just a generative AI tool, it's an generative AI problem. It's also an internet problem because the general purpose Gen AI tools are trained on the internet, some other data as well, but it's mainly every bit of data they can get their hands on the internet. So there's racial bias, there's gender bias, of course, there's global north bias, English language bias, and the importance about knowing about these biases and teaching our learners about them is that we can then, in our prompts, help to counteract those biases. So for example, until recently, if you asked for 3 CEOs in the ChatGPT, an image of them, they'd get 3, white men. So to counteract that bias, I could put in, please provide a, gender diverse group of say 5 CEOs, and that would probably be helpful. Let's say it's actually CEOs from Taiwan, so I'd ask for 5 gender diverse CEOs from Taiwan, and again, I'd get people that probably look more typically Taiwanese and hopefully gender diverse with that prompt as well. Another one, for example, let's say I'm asking for information about the Vietnam War. If I ask about it, because of the training data, I'm probably going to get almost exclusively the perspective of the United States on that topic. If I ask for information on the American war from, the Vietnamese perspective, which is what the Vietnamese called the war, it was the American war, the US war, from their perspective, I hopefully will get more information from the Vietnamese perspective and not just the American perspective. Another big issue is, especially if we have flipped learning or homework, what technology do our students or our learners have access to at home? And again, location can make a sense. If you're in more remote areas, it might be more difficult to get internet. Irregardless of internet, if you've got, like, for example, I have 5 children in my family, and when they were younger, we had a few computers, but not enough for everyone in the house, so people had to take turn in order to use them if it was required for an assignment. So something to keep in mind. So how about grading assignments with AI tools? Going back to the automate the mundane, not the mind thing that I've mentioned a couple times now, I would not recommend it. And actually at UVic, we are prohibited as instructors from using generative AI tools to grade assignments. I suspect there's probably a lot of school districts with similar policies, and it's not something I'd encourage. It might do an okay job at it, and maybe you could use it for some formative assessment, but even then I'd be wary, because if students find out that you're not actually looking at the assignments, how much work do you think they're going to put in at that point? Some might put in work, but others, well, if you're not going to look at it, it's not important enough for you to look at it, why should I spend my time working with it? So not recommended from my perspective. Environmental concerns are huge. There's electricity, there's water, the making of the computers and the equipment. 2 big things. There is a fair bit of, let me put it this way. The mainstream media has not done a great job, or most of the media has not done a great job at accurately communicating what's going on with electricity and water in particular. So just to give you an example on the electricity side, one generative AI prompt, a text prompt asking for a textual response from generative AI, is equal to about 7 Google searches, just to put it into context. One textual search is equal to about 16 minutes of an LED light bulb being turned on. 60 minutes of watching TV on a fairly large monitor is about 30 text prompts, textual generative AI prompts. Again, I'm just trying to help you get a sense for equivalency here. A 15-minute shower. How many generative AI text prompts would that equal? About 413. And last one on text prompts, a 3-hour flight to Calgary and back is about 30,000 text prompts in terms of energy consumption as measured in, I converted everything to joules because obviously the planes aren't using electricity like the generative AI prompts. And for images and video, as they are different, surprisingly to me, and this was shocking, images use 20% less energy than text prompts. So one image uses 20% less energy than one text prompt, which I was shocked. I had no idea, and it just has to do with the way that the AI tools work. And that's as much as I know. I don't have the technical background and knowledge to evaluate, but this is from an MIT study where they were running their own language model on, a huge, a small supercomputer, so they could measure how the energy it took to do these things. Video, on the other hand, a 5 or 10-second video is equivalent to about 700 generative AI text prompts, or about 5,600 Google searches. So it is a huge, energy suck. One last thing, I'll just get that moving image off the screen so as not to distract people. One other thing that the media has not done a good job of, and I don't have a slide for this, so I apologize, but people paying more for energy, and especially in the United States, is more a symptom of their unwillingness or inability to regulate like most provinces in Canada do. So for example, in Nevada, where one of my daughters currently lives, they've got signed contracts, or the local electricity provider signed contracts with them, but they didn't write into those contracts that the data centers would pay for the interconnection to them. They need, big power lines to go from the main power corridors to where they're going to be located. So the end users, all the users of their system will pay for it, which is crazy. The other thing that I don't know about, but in BC, for example, if a data center wants to set up shop, it's evaluated by BC Hydro, and they evaluate the economic benefit to the province before signing up. So a data center, it would go through that process. If it was something for Bitcoin mining, it's probably going to get axed real early in the process. If it's for generative AI, probably depends, how much energy they need to use, how many jobs it's going to create, those sorts of things. Because there's a finite supply, we just created a new dam, which has given us more electricity, but a lot of that is earmarked to help with to liquefy natural gas, so that they don't have to burn natural gas to liquefy, ironically, the natural gas to export. So it's complicated, and I think Canada does a better job of that than the United States in making sure that the environmental and other impacts aren't as negative on the environment as well as on just local people in terms of what they're going to have to pay for electricity. So going back to that Macbeth assignment again, could generative AI have helped Pat's teacher more easily customize the Macbeth assignment based on the rubric? Yeah, I'm confident it could have, had it been available at the time, which it wasn't. Are there any, just thinking about the disciplines that you folks are going to be teaching in, whether it be PE, math, science, are there any ways that you can think of potentially customizing assignments for students who are maybe struggling with a particular topic, or can't do something because of a physical limitation that they have? Again, this is something maybe for your critical reflection today. How could you potentially use it if you choose to? There's no obligation to, of course. So active learning time now. And the topic for a web page, you can work through the activities. If you are quite familiar with generative AI, you don't have to complete all of the introductory ones that are on prompt design, but I would at least look over them and see if there's anything there that you think could be useful. If you're fairly new to using generative AI, then you might want to work through them all. Please note that if you already use a generative AI tool, please feel free to use that one. If you don't want to use a generative AI tool, that's fine. Typically in a physical classroom, I just pair you up with someone who is using it so you could look over their shoulder. Maybe just look through the activities then, if you're in that category. If you'd maybe like to do it, but you don't want to create an account, I think it's Claude. I've got it. It's on the topic for today. I think Claude, let me just open it up here. I think Claude allows you to use their tool without a hands-on. Prompt design basic. Oh, it's Perplexity allows you to use their tool without signing on, although they do prompt you to sign on that you have to cancel a number of times. Or you can use Copilot and log in with your UVic credentials, and then you're using the UVic version of Copilot where the data stays in Canada, if you're concerned about that. But if you have a tool that you like to use, ChatGPT, Gemini, my favorite one currently is Gemini, or Claude, feel free to use those, but just in case you haven't used it before, I wanted to make sure that you knew these options. I hope that helps. Have a great week.